Well, welcome everyone today to today's Lunch with a Local, and very pleased to welcome Monica Oliphant, and in fact, Adjunct Associate Professor Monica Oliphant, to use your full title. So welcome, Monica.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me. That's good.
And to introduce Monica is slightly difficult because there's so many different things. There's so many different ways we could introduce Monica. We could talk about Monica as being the only female student in her 1960s physics class, so a STEM pioneer. We could talk about Monica as being a single mum who raised two children, another pioneer in that way. The patron of the Citizens' Own Renewable Energy Network, which we'll hear a bit about today. Past president of the International Solar Energy Society. I'm using so much of our time just describing all these achievements. Senior past senior South Australian Citizen of the Year and Officer of the Order of Australia. So it's a treat today to have you with us, Monica.
Thank you very much.
And to start, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which each of us meet today. For me, this is the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains. I'd like to pay my respect to elders past and present. So I've got a couple of questions to ask Monica, and those of you here, if you'd like to ask some questions, please use the chat feature to just type some questions and we'll be able to present those to Monica to hear. Okay, so let's commence. As I mentioned, you did study physics at university and you worked as an atomic researcher, I read. How does somebody who's an atomic researcher end up becoming a career specialist in renewable energy?
Well, I can remember the very day when I decided to go into solar energy. It was the time of the Arab oil crisis in the early 1970s, and I was washing the dishes in the kitchen. The children were playing near me, and I was listening to the radio, and Sir McFarlane Burnett came on, and it was an interesting thing for him to say because he's a virologist and a Nobel Prize winner in medicine, and he said, if we had solar energy, then we wouldn't have to fight over oil. And right then I thought, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to try and work in solar energy. So I bought a book and started reading. And at that time I was lived in Melbourne. My husband had recently died of colon cancer just before my second daughter had been born. And I decided to move back to Adelaide where my friends, where my parents and in-laws lived, and I got a house near Flinders Uni. And one day I walked up to the uni and went to see Professor Blevin in physical sciences and said, any chance of doing some research in solar energy? And he said he'd happened to apply for a grant in that area, hadn't come through yet, but he'd given me some part-time research assistance work until it came through, which it did. And I worked at Flinders for a few years in solar thermal concentrators and solar water heaters. But like most people in universities, after a while, the grant ran out and I had to find another job. And I applied for both ETSA and the gas company, and ETSA came through. At that stage, Bruce Dinham was general manager, and he had a sort of interest in renewables, and I was to do at ETSA a watching brief on recent developments in wind energy. This was 1981, and really it was all coal and gas at ETSA. They were looking for more new coal sources. So really there wasn't a very committed to wind. But a few years later, in 84 to 88, together with the Department of Mines and Energy, we did a wind survey of the state. At over 30 sites. We were the biggest wind survey in Australia, And that set us up for the 2000s, when people started looking for wind sites. They could get some free data from South Australia and could start with wind there. So that was my beginnings.
That's amazing, because now it's, you know, we can't go for a drive out of Adelaide without seeing all the wind farms that are there because of this pioneering work, which is fantastic. In addition to that wind mapping you did, what do you see as some of your career highlights in renewable energy?
Well, I'll come back to wind, but after moving, there wasn't all that much work to do in renewables at ETSA, and I went into energy efficiency, which was really a good thing to do. And I did a project together with the Housing Trust on the impact of solar water heaters, energy efficient appliances, and education on energy use in low-income families. And I went to a social psychologist and said, how can I affect a permanent change in the way people use energy? And he said, well, perhaps try feedback. So I probably was one of the first to put up in-house displays. We had to make them from scratch and get together a whole lot of information on how energy is used in the home. And that was a really great project. And later, I was involved in putting a solar diesel power station at Wilpena. It was the largest in the Southern Hemisphere at that stage, 100 kilowatts. My job was only to find a good site at Wilpena. And it was one of the highlights of my career to go around with an Aboriginal elder who showed me that it should, where the campsites of old were, and that we shouldn't have it within view of St Mary's Peak. And it was a great day walking around Wilpena with him and choosing a site. I left ETSA at the time of privatisation, and by that time I'd been joined many committees like the Australian New Zealand Solar Energy Society, and I managed to get on the review committee of the mandatory renewable energy target, MRET. And I'm going to read you something about MRET because I think it's really interesting, because it was the initiative that gave renewables a real start in Australia. So Howard wished to get the GST through Parliament. The Democrats' leader, Meg Lees, was horse trading. One demand was for the government to establish a greenhouse gas abatement program. The former Treasurer, Mr. Costello, said in a recollection in 2011, this was 1999. Neither Howard nor I had much idea of what a greenhouse gas was, let alone how to abate it. Trying to cooperate without blowing the financial position, I whispered to Howard, offer her 400. Okay, he said, 400 million. She accepted. I, Costello, tapped him on the shoulder and whispered in his ear, that's not what I meant. I meant we should offer her 400,000. There was no way to retract the offer. And so the mandatory renewable energy target was born, and it did set up Australia to move towards renewable energy. The target was 9,500 gigawatt hours in 2010, which moved to 20,000 in 2020, and later was increased by the Labour Party and then decreased by Abbott, and we've reached it. But my highlight within the mandatory renewable energy target was to give an incentive for PV 15 years upfront deeming, which means that you're deemed that a solar panel will produce a certain amount of electricity in a certain area of Australia, and you could give it a renewable energy certificate. In Adelaide, Adelaide, it was 1.4 renewable energy certificates. These were worth $40 each. 15 years upfront deeming meant that for every kilowatt of renewables, you got a credit of $840. So that was really good. So out of MREP, also something really interesting happened in South Australia. It was a target that people had to produce. Approximately 2% of electricity sales had to be renewable by 2010. And energy intensive industries said they didn't want it at all. It would make them not competitive. The states probably wanted 2%. But Mike Gran in South Australia said, we will make it 5%, which meant, because the baseline was 10% over Australia, 15% renewables by 2010. What South Australia had forgotten was the baseline was due to 10% hydro, and South Australia had no hydro. So we had to go from 0 to 15% in 7 years, and we got there a year early. And ever since, we have beaten our target. So I've been really proud of South Australia. But other highlights of my career was to be president of Renewable Energy, of International Solar Energy Society, and I had a great time going around the world with that.
Yeah, gosh, they're amazing stories, and the sort of history we don't always get to hear, and the combination of wind maps, a order of magnitude confusion with Megley's, and a misunderstanding of baselines seem to all collide to make South Australia one of the world leaders in renewable energy now.
Yes.
Which is a story that's not always fully appreciated. Like I wouldn't be surprised today if there's over 60, 70% renewable generation happening as we speak, maybe even more.
Yes.
Can you, we just don't hear this story. Can you tell us how South Australia does compare with the rest of the world in renewable?
Well, we've done really well, because on top, we grew very, very fast. With Mike Brown's incentives for wind, then the feed-in tariff for PV came in round about 2003. In fact, South Australia was the first state to legislate for the feed-in tariff, and we got a really good feed-in tariff, which meant that PV grew very, very fast. And as we are, in fact, over 50% now of renewables, and it's predicted that we will be around 83% of variable renewable energy, which is much different than some of the baseline, like hydro, which is continuous, by 2025, and possibly 100% a couple of years later. We are the second highest country in the world with our penetration of variable renewable energy, the highest being Denmark. But the difference between Denmark and South Australia is we're at the end of a very long transmission line with a very small interconnector with the eastern states that covers about 30% of our peak load, whereas Denmark is in a very big interconnected regime in Europe that covers 80% of the peak load, and its variable renewables is not so much solar and wind. It is wind plus biomass and biogas and waste, as well as wind and fossil fuel. So they have a bit of an easier ride. So we're pretty well one of the best in the world on variable renewable energy penetration.
It's extraordinary. And the technical problems are being resolved. What are the particular technical challenges? Because you used the notion of variable renewables. What are the challenges, and are they solvable?
Well, they certainly are solvable, but we did move so quickly that the big blackout in September 2016 was a wake-up call. And although the wording was intermittency was not a material factor in the blackout, it did cause a lot of problems here, and it did make us realize that we did need some storage within our system. And AEMO also said that we must have some gas generation on all the time to make sure that we can cope for these fluctuations, because at the time of the blackout we had lots of generation available that wasn't on. But then we had the bet by Elon Musk of 100 days to put in a big battery, otherwise he'd give it to us free. And when that came in, we got another nice comment from the Scott Morrison, actually, before he was Prime Minister. He said, I mean, honestly, by all means, have the world's biggest battery, have the world's biggest banana, have the world's biggest prawn like we have on the roadside around the country, but that is not solving the problem. Well, in fact, it did help to solve the problem, and the big battery has paid for itself virtually by now after 2 years of operation, whereas the big prawn and the big banana probably haven't done it. They definitely haven't done anything. And it's averted blackouts through frequency control and rapid response power delivery, increasing system stability. And we are now, I don't think since the big battery, at the big blackout, we have had any real serious blackouts in South Australia. So we are learning all the time. Other countries are learning from us. We have increasing the amount of battery storage within the system with our virtual power plants, and we're with it is certainly growing at a good rate. I just shut the door because of my doggies. Was starting to bark.
Yeah, thank you for that. We've got a couple of questions coming through. We might just ask one of those. Yeah. One was, gosh, it's quite a personal question, and I think I do know this. I know that you've I don't know it's hoarding or data research, but you've been collecting your energy bills for years and years, and there's a question about your home energy efficiency improvements and your electrical consumption graphs and how they have changed with occupancy changes in your home. And also there's a question about your involvement in Solar House Day.
Oh yes, the second question first. Right at the beginning when Solar House Day started, I coordinated the houses within South Australia, and it's a great initiative to enable people to see what other homes can do and get some really good ideas. Yes, I am a data junkie, and right from I think about 73 or 74, I've plotted my electricity use in the home, and it certainly did. When my daughters left home, I could see in the graphs how much decrease it was, and that was the biggest decrease in consumption. And then I put in then I have some money to put in a solar water heater, and I didn't have any north-facing windows, so I put in a conservatory, more insulation, and later PV. So I've done what I've tried to do what I've telling other people to do.
Yeah, and I guess that's what I find interesting about this discussion is that you've been engaged in the system-wide stories, but also the work with the Housing Trust is looking at the effects on people, individuals and communities, and your own personal story. So tell us about CARENA, which is an organisation you're patron of.
Yes, that's the Citizens Own Renewable Energy Network Australia, and that was started by Margaret Hender in about 2013, and it is a not-for-profit organisation that gives money on no-interest loans. It is divided into two groups. She started after her walk from Port Augusta to Adelaide with a group of people who wanted a solar thermal power station at Port Augusta, and she thought that we could, through crowdfunding perhaps, help that occur. Well, it has proved to be quite difficult to get that amount of millions of dollars. However, we have now crowdfunded over $670,000 for both quick win and big win projects, and mostly in the quick win projects, which have been small scale, not-for-profit projects for community groups, disability centres, special schools, and we've got over 30 projects around Australia now. And the big win projects are now for projects that wouldn't have gone ahead if they wouldn't have got special support. And so we lend the money, they save money and pay us back from the saving, and the money goes into the next project. So it's a revolving fund, and it's going well. And if you have any thoughts of other projects around Australia that might need funding, we're always interested.
Yeah, thanks. And there's a website, you can Google CARENA as
yes.
and yeah, you can find out all about it. And yeah, it's impressive how people are just not relying on government in some ways. They're just themselves. And in fact, there's a question from Ian. Lots of words here. I'll see if I can condense it down, because Ian's talked about recently returning from Europe, where he's just noticed that the people just get the notion of renewables and are just getting along, just making it happen is the language he uses. And he points out to the irony that we're so blessed with our renewable resources. We also have the minerals, things like lithium and that for the batteries. So what does the public of Australia need to do to make this happen, even if it's in spite of the current political ideology? So how do we cut through that?
I think that the states are certainly leading the way, that the government isn't showing us the way. So in terms of rooftop solar, on average in Australia, there are about 21-22% homes that have it. But South Australia has 38% of homes with rooftop solar, and Queensland 38.7%. And almost every day we're hearing of new renewable projects around Australia, and the penetration of coal is declining. Not fast enough, but it is. And I think, and I expect we will talk about this very briefly later, that the pandemic is showing the way that where the incentives, people are wanting incentives to go into climate change and renewables. In South Australia, I have forgotten, we've got a stimulus. I think we've got $3 billion in investment in renewables. Other states have got large amounts. We've got a chain of projects that can go ahead more than we need, and we need the interconnectors which are also being looked at and funded to put the extra renewables into the grid. But the two big projects are in the Northern Territory and in Western Australia, which are being looked at to put on multi-gigawatt plants that are going to feed power to Singapore and possibly produce hydrogen. So we've got some big plans in Australia, which I hope do in fact go ahead.
Yeah, fantastic. We've got a couple more questions, so let's keep working through these. From Jane, Monica, how much have solar panels improved in their efficiency over the past 10 years compared to when I bought my 5 panels? So yeah, are they getting more efficient?
They are, and they're finding different ways to become efficient, and also, of course, becoming a whole lot cheaper and larger. And there's some that are very much lighter, so that roofs that in the past couldn't take them can now, because they're so much thinner. I think the efficiencies were round between 11–18%, now are over 20%. So they are improving all the time. And then multi-layer type ones, which are more effective, more expensive, are becoming even more efficient. And then some that are able to stand on their own and have back reflection from the ground, that increases the efficiency too.
And do they have the challenge of shaded areas, part shading, has that improved over time?
They're putting in diodes and systems called are being put in, that if you've got shading, in the past, if you got shading from one panel, the whole row went out. Now it is just that particular panel. So that is happening now too.
Okay, great. And Michelle's got a question. What place do home batteries for home PV systems have in supporting peak demand challenges?
Yes, more and more people are putting in batteries because they're getting cheaper. People like me who are on the high feed-in tariff, it doesn't pay, but those that are on the much lower feed-in tariff, it certainly does pay to move your load from the daytime into a battery to be used at night, and making more use of it than you would get from feeding it into the grid and getting a very much lower return. And one of the new systems that is being considered, definitely in the West and in Victoria, are community batteries. So you have out on the street a large battery. People pay a daily rate of I've forgotten what it is in WA, but it isn't all that much. You pay to use the battery, and everybody feeds in, and you get a certain number of kilowatt hours at night when you want it. So it turns out cheaper than buying your own.
Fantastic, yes. And as you did mention, I would like to ask a couple of questions about the experience that we've all been in, and your personal reflections on that. And so when this pandemic ends, when the differences we're experiencing now move away, what things would you like to hang on to? And the question after that would be, what things are you itching to get back to?
The things that I'd like to hang on to is the webinars and the meetings that we have online. At this time of year, I would be going to some evening meetings in the cold and wet and dark, and being older, my eyesight's not that great. And it is lovely to sit at home and have a meeting at home. So I hope that stays, although I do still like to go out to coffee and meet with friends. And I reckon that I've heard that pollution in the air and cleaner air is happening around the world as a result of this. What I have been impressed with is that the politicians have respected scientific knowledge. You see ScoMo with the Chief Medical Officer, Professor Brendan Murphy, talking, and the Prime Minister taking account, and here's Stephen Marshall and Dr. Nicola Spurrier, who has become quite a celebrity. They're taking account of her recommendations regions. And it's great to see them considering scientific knowledge. And hopefully that will happen, translate to climate change, and perhaps the chief scientist will be standing next to ScoMo, and people will listen and the media won't be so negative, and we will get our stimulus packages going into climate change, which everybody is now talking about. Well, lots of people.
Yeah, it is very encouraging. Are there any particular projects you think that stimulus should be invested into?
Well, clean energy jobs, especially in the regions, and especially for people what we wish to transition out of the coal industry, reducing pollution, lowering electricity prices and lowering emissions and that sort of thing. Yes.
Yeah, that'll be, we can just hope that that's the stuff that we really
Yes.
Yeah, I've heard that term, building back better, or I've probably got it wrong, but yeah, but the idea that this is a sort of a once in a lifetime opportunity.
Yeah, and so many people are saying they'd like it to happen, that perhaps it will.
Yes, and yeah, and with your inspiration and the groundwork that you've done, we're actually in a position to do that. So I'll thank you, Monica, today for all your insights, and on behalf of everyone, thank you for your years of professional work, and and we are proud that we are one of the leaders in renewable energy because you and your colleagues and the efforts you've put in.
Yeah, there's been a big number and ever increasing. And many of the people here that I can see their faces have been involved too.
Yes, great. Oh, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.